Good afternoon and welcome back to Markets Today. I'm your host, Mbithe Mwema. With us in studio, we are joined by Mr. Churchill Ogutu, who is a senior economist at Genghis Capital. Welcome to the show, Churchill.
Thank you, Mbithe.
All right, budgets.
Yeah, it's that season.
It's that season.
Yeah.
I wonder if people do it at a household level or we just have all the time to just, talk ill of the government. But the budget policy statement is out. In terms of things that need to happen between now and the budget reading, maybe you can give us an overview of where we are at in terms of the budget making process.
Okay, for the sake of our viewers, the budget is not that single day where you see the CS of Treasury coming out to give a statement, but it's something that starts as early as August. For instance, for the next financial year,
Yes.
This process started August last year,
Okay.
whereby we had the budget review outlook paper, and then after that, we had what is called the sector working group. So where different sectors come up with their own estimates for the budget for the next year, and after that, it culminated to the budget policy statement. There was a draft that was published mid last month,
Okay.
and it was finalized and it was tabled in Parliament last week, the budget policy statement. And that is where we are currently. And after that, we have what is called the estimates that come, at least some ceilings for the budget, where the budget should be more or less within that ceilings. And from there, we have some revenue estimates for the next financial year. And based on that revenue estimates, what we'll have is now the division of revenue bill.
Okay.
So, for instance, for the total, for the next financial year, the ordinary revenue estimate is around 2.13 trillion. 2.13 trillion is total revenues, of which ordinary revenues are around 1.86 trillion.
Yes.
So that 1.86 trillion has to be divided between the national government and the county governments, and it results to the division of revenue bill.
Okay.
And in addition to that, there's now the county allocation revenue bill,
All right.
which now sort of breaks down that allocation to the counties.
Okay.
And after that, based on the overall budget within the ceilings, so now Treasury has now to go back after this budget policy statement has been approved by Parliament.
Okay.
So that's where we are, and the Budget Appropriation Committee has to go and come with its recommendation to approve and sort of give Treasury the go-ahead to start fine-tuning the budget.
And coming up with the finance bill.
Yes.
Okay.
So what we'll see is now they'll bring the draft budget estimates from the sectors, and then for the next financial year, actually you get the finance bill by end of April 27. So that's when it's expected to be tabled,
Okay.
the finance bill, and then the appropriation bill now, which tackles the aspects about the expenditure. Now appropriation bill will come. That's now the
That's
one
when
that
now
comes.
it comes. Okay.
Yeah, with that when we see the CS coming with the
Okay.
budget. and
Then now
tables the
that's when he
presentation.
reads it. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So where we are at, the policy statement has already been tabled to Parliament.
Yes, that was last week. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The numbers that we are seeing in the policy statement, would we now normally expect them to be changed as we get further along the budget making process?
Yes. Yeah. Because even as an example is what the numbers we have for the current financial year. What was initially approved in the 2019 budget policy statement was around 1.82 trillion, and what National Assembly
Yes.
approved in the appropriation bill was around 1.92 trillion.
Okay, so there's probably
yeah.
10%, 5 to 10% adjustment upwards.
Yes.
But perhaps we can just put up our graphics team can put up the numbers there that we should be looking out for in the budget policy statement. All right. We'll await our graphics team to just put that out, because it details out the total revenue, the total expenditure, the budget deficit, as well as the total financing. There we have it up there. So as we're looking at these numbers, Churchill, we can see the total revenue figure that we have, as you mentioned earlier, is 2.13 trillion shillings.
Yeah.
And the objective, or the sentiment that we're getting from this budget, it's a lot of austerity has been done. It's all about fiscal consolidation. When you see the number of 2.134 trillion, is that a feasible number that we could possibly achieve in the next financial year?
It's a bit difficult looking at even the performance for the current financial year. Already the numbers for that 6-month period, we are down 124 billion, just to give you a sense.
Okay.
And this is also based on there was some revision which was done mid-year. in the current financial year, because just based on the performance of the last financial year. So an increase of around 50 billion in terms of the overall revenues from 2.08 trillion to 2.134 trillion. So we're seeing a 50 billion increase. I believe it could just be a stretch. We'll be stretching ourselves further.
So as usual, we're always doing this every year. So this is nothing new. It was expected.
This is nothing new.
Okay. And what about the total expenditure line? We did have a total expenditure of 2.7 trillion. I think our graphics team can possibly just hold that up for us. We're just doing a bit of a discussion around that. 2.7 trillion. Is that lower than what we saw last year? Does that show us that fiscal consolidation is becoming a reality in terms of government looking to spend less?
One thing, just to put it out there, is 2.7 trillion is expenditure and net lending.
Yes.
And if you look at the whole budget, there's that element about refinancing even the debt. So that 2.7 trillion excludes repayments on both external and internal side.
So it's just wages and development expenditure.
Yeah, so that's wages, development expenditure, and also in addition to that, interest payments. So ideally, all the consolidated fund services, excluding repayments, now which in my estimates around 300 billion.
Yes.
So you're looking at, if it more or less consolidate that figure, it's coming to around 3.3 trillion, where it was in the initial budget for the current financial year. And of course, you know that we had a supplementary, and it sort of
so it pushed it up.
Pushed it up, yeah.
All right. And also, interestingly, I think when you're looking at this, the breakdown of the expenditure is wages. That's recurrent expenditure, largely wages, which has remained more or less flat. The interesting thing that we did notice was the development expenditure. So it looks like they have posted a lower number, but at the cost of development expenditure.
Yeah, and that is a concern. And even looking at the current financial year, just keep on the current financial year because that's where we are. You find that, yes, say there's a 460 billion estimate for development expenditure, and the first month of the financial year, that's on July, we find that there's a moratorium on new projects. So there's a freeze for 2 months. There's no development spending, and that is a concern. And I feel that that's the easiest way to cut when it comes to austerity. That yes, there's austerity, but the easiest chicken to roost is now development.
We do not have any development, but that's not good, because it means that perhaps the roads that need to be maintained might not be done. But then the allocation could possibly go to the phase 2B of the SGR, which is the extension all the way to Kisumu. So our priority is misplaced. Are we just trying to tick the box and say we have cut back on expenditure, but really it's neither here nor there?
What I can just say, I'm not the treasury spokesperson, but there's this thing about this line called Big Four. That everything has to be aligned towards Big Four. So and if anything is not aligned towards Big Four, it's easy to slash. But that said, we see also Treasury coming out saying that they have been getting this funding because we find that most of the development spending projects are funded by donors. So we find that there's been a slow absorption of the donor funds, which curtails even the development spending. So that's an issue that they really need to look even going forward.
All right. So we'll just keep paying our employees and keep allocating money to the counties, but at the cost of development. Yet our 10-year goal is to develop this country and build infrastructure.
Which is the unfortunate bit.
That's the unfortunate bit. I think sticking to the same chart, if we look at the budget, the deficit, really the primary deficit, that's about 614 billion. But based on the conversation that we have just had, you're saying that this could possibly be on the lower end. It should adjust upwards because there's some things that have not been incorporated here.
For the next financial, I think we're looking at 571 billion in terms of the fiscal deficit, inclusive of grants.
Inclusive of grants. Okay, this it does not include grants. Okay, yes, it is 571
for the next financial year.
Yes, if you put in the grants.
Yeah, funny enough, for the current financial year, fiscal deficit inclusive of grants is around 748 billion.
Okay.
And then there's this one line item, adjustment to cash, whereby there's an expectation that there'll be another 90 billion received from it's like you already forwarded monies to the ministries, department and agencies, and yet they are not utilizing, and then you expect them back towards the end of the financial year, so to the tune of 90 billion. So it's more or less something of cushioning even the full fiscal deficit here. So right now we are sort of kidding ourselves that you're around 640 billion, 645 billion, but yet that's not the full picture.
That's not the real. That's not the real place
I look
where
at
we
it,
are.
fiscal deficit inclusive of grants, which are 748 billion.
Yes.
So if you compare this financial year and the next financial year, there's a difference of around 150 billion.
Yes.
So on that perspective alone, you can say that wow,
the deficit should actually be closer to probably 850 billion as opposed to the 641 or 571, depending on what line item you're looking at.
So for the next financial year, at least you can argue that, okay, fiscal deficit inclusive of grants has reduced significantly from 748 billion to 571 billion, which is around 150 billion, northward of that. Yeah.
All right.
So that is a big plus if I look at it in this whole 2020 budget policy statement.
Okay, then maybe the final thing that I'm looking at here, and which is the crux of this conversation, we're either looking at 571 or it could be 850. I mean, last year there was 150 billion that had not been incorporated in the budget policy statement. What does this mean for domestic borrowing?
It will either two things. We could see now an increase in domestic borrowing, or we could now have to resort to external borrowing. Looking at even, just to give you some sense around it, when the 2020 budget policy statement was tabled in Parliament, there was also an additional document, 2020 medium-term debt strategy paper. So now between for the next 3 financial years, and in terms of expectations in borrowing, it gives a split between where domestic and external borrowing will be. And what is proposed in that document is that 72% of the financing in the next 3 financial years will be towards domestic borrowing, 72%, and 28% will be now external financing for foreign borrowing.
What does that mean in numbers? Does the government borrow 400 billion from the domestic market? Does it borrow 500 billion? Does it borrow 300? Does it borrow 250?
And here is the thing, because if you look at the budget policy statement, and if you work through the numbers, you find that the next financial year, as opposed to 28% external borrowing, we have 63% in net external financing terms.
All right.
And if you look at the domestic quantum, as opposed to 72%, we have the difference, 63%. So the issue here is, are we looking at it that 28%, 72% split in net domestic terms or in gross domestic terms? Because that's where the whole arithmetic now changes. Because if you look at gross domestic terms for the next 3 financial years, we're looking at a total of 1.5 trillion external financing.
So 1.5 trillion is the money that we're going to take from the external markets in the next 3 years.
In the next cumulatively for the next 3 years. And if that is 28%, it translates for the next 3 years on a cumulative basis, we'll get another 4.5 trillion borrowed domestically. 4.5 trillion, which works out an average of 1.5 trillion
every year
domestically. And yet at the same breath, we're talking about not to crowd out private sector.
That's what I was going to get to. If the government then needs to borrow about 1.5 trillion
per year
shillings from the domestic economy, then are you and I going to access credit?
It's a bit difficult. But now the other side, you can say that of course there are some maturities happening here and there.
Redemptions.
So it's redemptions.
All right.
But now in gross terms is 1.5 trillion.
1.5
per
trillion
year. If you look at it in gross terms,
Wow.
But if you look at it in net domestic terms, the arithmetic is quite different.
The number could be slightly different.
Yeah.
That's a very good point to take a quick break. The NSC has closed. Look out for the closing bell.